Hi there, I'm Clarice and you're on the Live Ready YouTube channel. I'm back in my kraal today and I'm going to unpack my camping hammock in such a way as to make it into a tent to show you how you can improvise should you find yourself in a scenario where there aren't sufficient trees for you to hang your hammock. There's a lot of debate around which one is better, the tent or the camping hammock, and both of those have their pros and their cons. But if you find yourself bugging out somewhere and you don't have sufficient trees to hang your camping hammock, or you've gone on a hike and you never made it to the place where you were supposed to camp and you've got to improvise, then this is a great way that you can turn bugs into mush, your camping hammock into a tent, and improvise in order to make yourself a shelter. Now, I have previously in my bug out bag video told you that I have a camping hammock as my bug out shelter, and there are a couple of reasons why I chose that, and I did actually do sufficient research before I decided on that. And I'm going to run through my criteria for choosing a shelter for my bug out bag. What comes standard in the bag are 2 aluminium tent pegs. In a packet I've added some extra guy lines just for setting it up as a camping hammock. I like to have extra lines, especially if it's windy. And then I've got my base in here, my hammock itself, and the fly is underneath because I don't want to take the fly out and leave it on the ground at the moment. So I packed it specifically in this way. If I'm packing it to set it up as a hammock, I'll obviously pack the fly on top so I can set the fly up with a ridgeline so that I'm dry in case I'm setting up in the rain. Then I've got a roof and I can just continue under my shelter. So I'm back in my kraal today, and the first thing that I've done is I've done a little perimeter walk, repaired any damage because we've had a bit of a storm here recently and I see the wind's done a number on some of the parts of the kraal. So I've just made that safe again and checked for snakes and checked for things that have moved into the area since you've been there. So if you've got a regular campsite that you visit, remember to do a perimeter check, remember to check the area, don't assume that it is as you left it the last time. Animals and other people might have come into that enclosure or into that area since you've last been there. For example, we don't have only leopards around here. I've also got to be concerned about the poachers. Because we live nearby the sea, we often get poachers coming through and hiding things in the bush that they've poached from the ocean. So I need to be considerate of any tracks, any spoor, any signs that any other human has been in the area, as well as animals. And then I did a little search for snakes and bugs and things as well. The most I found was a frog and a caterpillar, so I think we're all clear. So check that the area underneath where you're planning to camp is nice and clear, and if you can, add some nice soft stuff to make a natural bed for yourself. The hammock that I have is a legacy hammock, and it's something that I managed to find on Amazon. And the reason why I chose this particular one over other ones is, one, it had a really nice camouflage sheet. I wanted it to be able to blend into the surroundings really easily so that if I'm planning on remaining concealed, I don't stand out in the bush. My other criteria for selecting a shelter was a sufficiently waterproof and windproof shelter. In the Western Cape we've got a lot of wind, so something that is open on the sides is not necessarily going to make a good bug out shelter. If I'm going on a camping trip into the wild, then by all means I'm going to put up a nice fly sheet, I'm going to make sure that I've got a nice view. But for an emergency scenario, that's not something that I'm concerned about. This camping hammock comes with 2 aluminium tent pegs that look like this. Standard aluminium pegs, still got a bit of dirt on them. And if you're looking for descriptions or for links for any of the products that I've got in this video, check the description of this video. And often we need a couple more tent pegs, and 2 is not usually enough, so keep a couple more on you. I've got some other tent pegs from an old tent of mine that I've added to this tent or to this bag as well, so I keep them around. But if you do need an extra tent peg, it's easy enough to make one for yourself using a stick in the wild. Now, I know some of the hammock enthusiasts out there will say, yes, but hammocks are not meant to stay on the ground. They're not meant to be in the position where they can chafe or where they have any kind of friction on the hammock itself because it's not durable enough. The hammock that I have is actually a tent as well. You can set it up as a tent. It's another criteria for why I picked this particular hammock. So here are a couple of things to consider. In an emergency scenario, you're probably not going to be the only person who seeks shelter somewhere or who needs to build a shelter. In some instances, if you get lost in the wild or so, you might find yourself alone, and then your shelter would be sufficient just for you and you only need a shelter for yourself. But in a scenario such as an evacuation due to fire or flood, you might actually need to harbor other people. And women often end up harboring pets and kids. Then always remember that with tents there are usually clips that clip onto the frame. So before you go ahead and tie down the edges, check that all of your clips and your ties are actually tied to the frame, and that will support your structure. There are some advantages of hammocks over tents. Hammocks can be elevated off the ground so that you don't have that wetness that comes through from the ground, especially if there's a lot of rain. In some instances, hammocks can be made into tents, so you have the opportunity to decide whether you want a tent or a hammock shelter. A disadvantage of hammocks, especially the one that I've got, is because it's got tent poles in order to keep it rigid and upright. It can actually be a little bit heavy. However, I know that if I need to dump something, I can dump the tent poles and I'll be perfectly fine just setting up a ridgeline and using the fly sheet as a shelter. So here's the thing about emergencies. You plan for the worst and you hope for the best. And in every scenario, in every instance in that emergency, you consider the worst thing and work towards your best case scenario. Well, there you have it, Camping Hammock goes tenting. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching, and until the next time, live ready. That's enough work for one day. Yeah.